To make our ESTER scrub cap, you're of course going to need your pattern pieces, so 1 and 2. You're also going to need transfer paper and a tracing wheel. You need a seam ripper, a rotary cutter, pattern weights to hold your pattern down onto the fabric. You're also going to be using 1/4 inch elastic. Also going to need a cord stop, and all of these supplies will be linked in the description box below. Of course, your thread to match your fabric. And if you guys didn't know, these pin cushions are in my pattern shop as well. I'll have that link in the description bar below. To make our scrub cap, you want to grab your pattern pieces and you're going to place that onto the wrong side of your fabric. The grain line on your pattern piece should be parallel with the selvage edge of your fabric. Use your pattern weights to hold the pattern down, and then you just want to use your rotary cutter to cut all around the pattern pieces. Now that you have your pattern pieces cut out, go ahead and grab your tracing paper and your tracing wheel, and you're going to transfer all of those markings that are on the pattern. These markings are very, very, very important for making your scrub cap. So make sure you press down firmly whenever you're using your tracing wheel to transfer all of those markings. These markings are going to be very important later on in the sewing steps. Now we can finally get to the fun part and actually sew our scrub cap. Go ahead and take your fabric to your serger if you have one. If not, it's okay. You can go ahead and use some pinking shears or any other method to finish that raw edge of your fabric. So I'm just serging those raw short edges of pattern piece number 2. This is going to be the center back seam. So now that I've serged, I'm just going to pin my fabrics with right sides together, and I'm going to pin along that short edge. On one of the short edges, we have our dots. So whenever we sew, we're going to leave a small opening at that dot. I'm just going to sew about 1/2 inch down, and then I'm going to back stitch. I'm going to skip about 1/4 inch of that fabric, and then I'm going to sew again, starting with a back stitch and then just sewing all the way down. Barely see it, but there's a small little opening. That's going to be the opening where our elastic is going to fit through, so make sure you don't skip this step. Now you can just go ahead and finger press that seam open, and then I'm going to serge all the way around this raw edge of the fabric. Take your fabric to your ironing board and you just want to press that center back seam open. Now you want to grab your 1/4 inch elastic, and again we cut this 14 inches long. We're working on the side where you left that small little opening in the seam of your fabric. You're going to grab the short edges of your elastic and you're going to pin that to the center of the stitch line. Again, we transferred these markings in the earlier step. Just want to pin the elastic to the fabric in the center of that stitch line. Take your fabric to your sewing machine and you're going to sew those elastic ends in place to the fabric using a stretch stitch. Repeat that to both ends of the elastic. Once you've sewn the elastic in place, you just want to fold over that fabric over the elastic 1 inch in. So just go ahead and fold your fabric over the elastic 1 inch in. You're going to do that all the way around the top edge. This is going to be the forehead area of your fabric. Now you can just sew that 1 inch hem in place all the way around. As you're sewing your hem in place, just make sure not to catch the elastic that's inside of your fabric. So just sew very close to that raw edge and you should be fine. If you are an absolute beginner, before sewing this hem in place, I do recommend taking your fabric to your ironing board and using a seam gauge to just press in that 1 inch hem and then press that in place with your iron. This is just going to make sure that you have a nice smooth 1 inch hem. But if you have more experience, usually we'll just turn that hem over and sew it in place. So every time you sew a seam or a hem, it is good practice just to take your fabric to your ironing table and press that all the way around. Working on the wrong side of the fabric, you're going to move that center back seam out to meet the pleat line. So the seam of the center back is aligned with the pleat line on the fabric. You're going to do that to both pleat lines and the center back seam. Go ahead and just pin that fabric in place. You'll know you'll have it right if it looks just like this on the right side of your fabric. Take your fabric to your sewing machine and just use a basting stitch to stitch that pleat in place. With right sides together, we're going to pin pattern piece number 1 to pattern piece number 2. So your crown piece and your main fabric piece. You're going to pin those together again with right sides facing. So the pretty sides of the fabric are facing each other. You're going to just pin that in place, matching the notches, and you're going to ease in the fabric as needed. Once you've pinned that in place, just go ahead and take your fabric to your sewing machine and you're gonna sew all the way around. I like to start at the center back seam. So I'm gonna start at the center back seam and sew all the way around. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning of your seam and always backstitch at the end of your seam as well. So we're just gonna sew all the way around using 1/2 inch seam allowance, making sure to remove those pins as you go. Once you've sewn your pieces together, just go ahead and finish that raw edge using either pinking shears or your serger. So I'm just going to serge all the way around. I'm not trimming any of the excess fabric off, I'm just finishing that raw edge. So once I've done that, I'm just going to finger press that seam towards the forehead area of the fabric. That 1-inch hem that we made earlier, I'm just going to finger press that seam towards that 1-inch hem all the way around. And I'm doing this on the wrong side of the fabric. Then I'm gonna turn my scrub cap with the right sides facing out. And then I'm gonna top stitch that seam allowance in place all the way around. Again, I'm working on the right side of the fabric. I'm just sewing about 1/4 inch away from that seam line. This is just top stitching that seam allowance in place. All right, you guys, we're almost done with our scrub cap. So now we want to grab our cord lock and just have that nearby. And then we're just going to grab some tweezers and we're going to find that small little opening that we made in our first sewing step. We want to just use those tweezers to kind of fish out that elastic out of that small little opening. So once you have your elastic out, just grab a few inches and then you want to grab your cord stop and just attach that to the elastic. So once I have that cord stop in, I'm just gonna make a small little knot at the edge of the elastic just to keep that cord lock from going anywhere. Now you can try on your scrub cap and adjust that cord stop as needed. That's one of the great things about this adjustable scrub cap. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Make sure you check out my other videos and my other sewing patterns. Again, I'll have this ESTER Euro cap linked in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for watching and make sure to subscribe and stay tuned. I do have another scrub cap tutorial coming out very soon. See you guys in the next one. Bye!